Vivien Winters gave her last dollar to save a dying stranger bleeding out in a diner booth at 3 in the morning. She had no idea the man she was helping was Alessandro Calabrese, the most feared Korean Mafia boss in San Francisco. The December night outside pressed against the diner windows like frozen glass, frost crawling across the checkered floor tiles as neon lights buzzed overhead, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with copper blood. Her hands shook as she pressed wadded napkins against the stranger's shoulder wound. Her own face was already swollen from Douglas's fists 3 hours earlier. One eye nearly shut. Handprint bruises purple across her throat like a permanent reminder of his rage. The man in the charcoal coat watched her with dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything, blood soaking through his expensive white shirt, his breathing shallow but deliberate. She pulled out her last dollar. A crumpled single. Her entire remaining fortune on earth. She slid it across the table to Marge, the night waitress who had stopped asking questions about Vivien's bruises months ago. "Call an ambulance," Vivien whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming earlier when Douglas's hands tightened around her neck. "Please. This is all I have, but call anyway." Alessandro's hand caught her wrist. His grip was gentle despite the blood loss, despite the fact that he was dying on a vinyl diner seat at 3 in the morning in a neighborhood most people crossed the street to avoid. "Why?" His voice came out like thunder wrapped in gravel. She met his dark eyes. What was left of her gaze burned from her one good eye, fierce and defiant in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew her from the years before Douglas found her. Because nobody should die alone in a place like this. Alessandro studied her for 3 long seconds. He noticed everything. The worn fabric of her jacket. The chemical smell of cheap soap on her skin. The way her hands did not shake because she was afraid, but because she was furious. He had seen thousands of men in his 47 years, and he had never seen this. A woman with nothing, choosing to give everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to the night 6 hours earlier when Vivien's world shattered on a highway in the freezing dark. 6 hours before the diner booth. 6 hours before the dollar bill that would change everything. Vivien sat in the passenger seat of Douglas Hale's truck, a black Ford F-150 with tinted windows and a GPS tracker hidden under the hood that she did not know about. Douglas drove with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on her thigh, his fingers pressing into the soft flesh above her knee with enough force to bruise. He was tall, 43 years old, with salt and pepper hair and a smile that had fooled her the first time she met him at a gas station convenience store where she worked, back when she still believed people could be good. "You were talking to Marcus at the diner," he said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I wasn't talking to him. He asked me for coffee. I brought him coffee." Douglas's hand tightened on her thigh. "You brought him coffee?" The truck swerved slightly as he removed his hand to light a cigarette. Vivien watched the lighter glow orange in the darkness, the highway stretching empty ahead of them, streetlights occasional and far between. They were heading away from the city, away from people, away from anywhere she could scream. "Marcus is nobody," she said quietly. "He was waiting for his friend. You need to stop talking to other men." Her throat felt tight. She had heard this before. Heard it in 100 different phrasings over the 6 months since Douglas had appeared at her workplace and told her she was beautiful, told her he wanted to take care of her, told her she did not need to work double shifts anymore because he had money and he wanted to provide. By the time she realized those double shifts were her only escape, it was too late. He had isolated her from the other waitresses. He had introduced her to his friends, cops, mostly, men in uniform who laughed when she mentioned being unhappy, who told her to be grateful for a man willing to love her. The truck exited the highway at a dark interchange. No other cars visible. No buildings. Just industrial concrete and the wind rushing through bare tree branches like something desperate trying to escape. Douglas pulled the truck into a parking lot beside a closed warehouse. The silence that followed was worse than yelling. Worse than the fist she knew were coming. "Get out," he said. She did not move. She had learned that moving too quickly made it worse. That anticipating the violence sometimes provoked him to make it more severe. He reached across the console and grabbed her hair at the base of her skull. He pulled her toward him until her face was close to his face, until she could smell the cigarette and whiskey on his breath. I said, "Get out of my truck." The cold air hit her skin as he shoved her out of the passenger side. She stumbled on the gravel, caught herself on the truck's bumper. Her jacket tore. Her palm scraped open. What happened next was something no one would understand unless they had stood in an empty parking lot at 2:30 in the morning with someone who owned their entire world. He hit her once across the face. Her eye swelled shut within seconds, the pain white and exploding across her vision. Then his hands found her throat and squeezed. He did not squeeze hard enough to kill her. He never squeezed hard enough to kill her, because dead women were inconvenient. Dead women brought police investigations, and Douglas had friends on the police force who would not investigate too carefully, but they would investigate. He squeezed hard enough to teach her. Hard enough that her vision went purple, then black, then came rushing back as he released her, and she dropped to the gravel gasping, her lungs burning, her throat screaming in a way her voice could not. "If I find out you talk to Marcus again," he said, "I will find your sister. I will find out where she lives. I will take a nice long visit." Vivien's sister lived in Portland. She had not spoken to her in 7 months. Douglas had ensured it by monitoring her phone, by destroying her relationships, by making it clear that anyone she loved was leverage. Douglas drove away and left her there. This was a tactic he used. It was not kidnapping if you could walk back to the highway. It was not imprisonment if there was theoretically a way to escape. The highway was 2 miles away. She had no phone. She had $32 in her jacket pocket and a bus pass that expired 3 days ago. She walked toward the light she could see in the distance, her eye swelling, her throat screaming with every breath, the December cold cutting through her torn jacket like a blade through butter. The gravel crunched under her shoes. Above her, the sky was starless, heavy with clouds that threatened snow. By the time she reached a gas station on the edge of the city, it was 2:45 in the morning, and she had made a decision. She would not go back. She could not survive another 6 months of this. The last of her money, the $200 she kept hidden from Douglas in her work locker, had to last her long enough to figure out how to disappear. She used the gas station's bathroom to clean the blood from her face. The mirror showed her the truth she had been trying to avoid. A woman in her late 20s who looked 15 years older. Eyes empty. A bruise spreading across her face in shades of purple and black. Handprints on her throat like a signature written in pain. The gas station attendant, a young man with tired eyes, did not ask questions when she used the computer behind the counter to check her bank account. $138, after Douglas had drained her checking account twice. Her last paycheck would arrive in 3 days. 3 days to keep living on what she had. 3 days before she could access any money at all. She walked to the all-night diner 6 blocks away, the only place that would hire her, with a black eye and bruises that screamed their source to anyone paying attention. The diner was called Mel's. It had been the same for 42 years, unchanged and unmoving in the middle of a city transforming around it. Marge had worked there for 38 of those years. "Jesus, honey," Marge said when she saw Vivien's face. Marge was 62, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of eyes that had seen everything and forgiven most of it. "He do that?" Vivien could not speak. Her throat hurt to breathe. She nodded. "You need to call someone. There are places that help." "I need the shift tonight," Vivien said instead. "Is anyone else scheduled?" Marge studied her for a long moment. The diner was empty except for the cook and a man in a charcoal coat sitting in the back booth, nursing black coffee and bleeding through his white shirt. The sound of his breathing was the first thing Vivien noticed when she approached to take his order. Not struggling breathing. Not panic breathing. Just breathing that was becoming harder, more deliberate, each intake of air a conscious choice. He looked up at her with dark eyes that seemed to calculate her value in the space of 3 seconds. She did not know yet that those eyes had watched boardrooms tremble. That those eyes had witnessed federal investigations collapse. That those hands, now pressing against his wound, had never signed anything that could be used as evidence. "Water," he said. His voice was steady. "And do not call anyone." She brought him water. She brought him napkins from the bathroom, the good kind, the softest one she could find. She worked her shift around him, checking on him every few minutes, noticing that the bleeding was not stopping, that his skin was becoming paler, that whatever had happened to him was catching up with him in slow motion. At 3 in the morning, when she pulled out the last dollar bill from her jacket pocket, she did not think about what it meant to lose it. She did not think about the fact that it was between her and homelessness. She thought only that a man was dying, and she had the power to call someone, and the money belonged to him more than it belonged to her. Alessandro Calabrese's hand caught her wrist as she slid the dollar across the table. His grip was gentle. His voice was quiet. "Why?" And when she told him that nobody should die alone in a place like this, something shifted in the darkness of his eyes. Something cold and dangerous and utterly focused stirred in his chest. He did not know yet that this moment would remake both their lives completely. 6 hours before the diner. Highway 101 stretched empty under a darkening sky, the kind of grey that made afternoon feel like dusk. Vivien Winters gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda Civic as black smoke curled from under the hood. The engine coughed once, twice, and died. She coasted onto the shoulder, her hand shaking not from the cold but from what had happened 2 hours earlier in the apartment she thought Douglas didn't know about. The fight replayed in her mind like a recording she couldn't stop. His voice first, slurred and vicious, echoing through the small rooms. "You think you can hide from me?" His breath had reeked of whiskey and rage. "You think I won't find you?" She had backed toward the kitchen, her phone in her pocket, her mind calculating which window was closest. His fist came up without warning. The crack of bone on bone, her eye socket absorbing the impact. Stars exploded across her vision. Then his hands, massive and merciless, wrapped around her throat. She had felt her feet leave the ground. She had felt the blood rushing to her head, the darkness beginning to pull at the edges of her sight. "You're mine, Vivien." His voice was a growl, a curse, a promise of ownership. "You'll always be mine." Her knee had found his groin. It was not elegant. It was not fair. It was survival. He had dropped her, gasping, and she had run. Her car keys were on the kitchen counter. She had grabbed only her purse, the small canvas bag that held everything of value in her life. Now, with sleep beginning to fall and the temperature dropping toward 28 degrees, Vivien opened that purse with trembling fingers. $200 in cash. That was all that remained. Everything else had been consumed by the machinery that Catherine Mercer had set in motion like a woman programming a computer designed to destroy her. Catherine. The name alone made something bitter rise in Vivien's throat. Catherine Mercer, with her salon-perfect hair and her country club membership, with her $5,000 handbags and her voice like honey poured over broken glass. Catherine, who had decided in some moment of divine cruelty that Vivien's existence was an inconvenience that needed to be erased. Catherine had made 3 phone calls 2 months ago. 3 phone calls to the managers at the restaurants where Vivien worked. In each call, she had mentioned theft. Never proven. Never specific. Just enough doubt, just enough liability, just enough reason to say, "We're letting you go." The jobs had been minimum wage, anyway. But they had been all Vivien had. From the pocket of her work uniform, she pulled out the list. It was handwritten on graph paper, the ink beginning to smudge from being folded and unfolded 100 times. She updated it every morning, crossing out the days, adding new debts as they materialized like bills for a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Rent, $1,400, overdue since November 1st. Storage unit, $340, the place where she kept the few possessions that didn't fit in the car. Phone bill, $87. Doctor for the rib Douglas had cracked last month when he had found her the first time, $2,300, a debt she could not pay because she had no insurance. At the bottom, in numbers she had circled 3 times in red pen, the total, $65,000, due in 5 days or everything dissolved into nothing. The apartment would be forfeit. The storage unit would be claimed. She would have only what fit in this dying car. The sleet turned to freezing rain. The drops became larger, heavier, striking the windshield like accusations. Vivien turned the key in the ignition. The engine turned over but would not catch. Again. The grinding sound of a motor that had given everything it had to give and now was finished. She sat in the silence that followed, her breath fogging the windows, the list clenched in her hands. Then headlights appeared through the storm. 3 black SUVs moved through the darkness like sharks cutting through deep water. They moved slowly, not searching but sweeping, the way things moved when they expected nothing to escape them. They slowed as they approached her car. Vivien's breath caught. She looked in the mirror. No other traffic. Just these 3 vehicles and the rain and the dying light. The center SUV stopped beside her. The back door opened with the kind of deliberate slowness that meant nobody was asking permission. A man stepped out into the freezing rain. He wore a charcoal coat that probably cost more than the Honda Civic had cost when it was new. Under the coat, she could see the front of a white shirt, and spreading across that shirt like a flower blooming in time-lapse, blood. Deep red. Considerable. He moved toward her window as if the blood was irrelevant, as if his body was simply a tool carrying out a function and whatever was breaking inside of it could be addressed later. Behind him, 2 men emerged. They wore dark suits and carried themselves with the kind of readiness that suggested violence was as familiar to them as breathing. Their hands stayed near their jackets, positioned for access. They flanked the man in the charcoal coat like parentheses around an important statement. He reached her window. She rolled it down. The rain came in sideways, cold enough to steal breath. His eyes were dark. Darker than the November sky. Darker than the storm. He looked at her battered face, the swelling around her left eye that was beginning to turn purple, the bruises on her throat that looked like fingerprints because they were fingerprints. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Maybe 4. In that small stretch of time, she felt something calculating happening behind those dark eyes, some assessment being made that she could not interrupt. "You need help," he said. Not a question. A statement. His voice was steady and solid, like an oath written in a language she did not speak. She saw the blood again. The nursing instinct kicked in, the ghost of the year she had spent in community college before the money ran out, before Douglas had found her the first time and made her choose between staying alive and continuing her education. "You're hurt," she said. "You need a hospital." "I will not be going to a hospital." He studied her again, and something in his expression shifted, like a door opening onto a room she was not prepared to enter. "You will get in the vehicle. We will take you somewhere safe." She should have said no. She should have rolled up the window and called the police, though the police had always sided with Douglas before, though one of the officers had actually called her a liar when she filed the 3rd report. She should have held on to her $200 and her list and her rapidly disappearing future. But the cold was bone deep. Douglas knew this highway. He had probably already found her apartment. And this man, bleeding as he was offering the only alternative available to her in this moment: disappear or be found. She grabbed her purse. The $200, the handwritten list, the key to a car that no longer ran. She stepped out into the rain and into the back of the center vehicle, where the wounded man was already sitting, his hand pressed against his side, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing something important. The door closed. The rain was sealed out. The engine started, smooth and powerful and absolutely certain of its direction. As they pulled back onto the highway, Vivien looked down at the list in her trembling hands. $65,000 in 5 days. And now she was riding with 3 men whose names she did not know, toward a destination that had not been specified, into a darkness that was absolute and possibly irreversible. The man beside her shifted slightly. "What is your name?" His voice cut through the sound of the engine, the rain, her own terrified heartbeat. "Vivien," she whispered. "Vivien Winters." "I am Alessandro," he said. And behind her, she heard Sergio and Franco exchange a look in the front seat, the kind of look that suggested Alessandro did not usually introduce himself to strangers picked up from the side of highways. "You are safe now, Vivien. Whatever brought you to that car alone in the dark, it will not reach you again. I am going to make sure of that." She believed him. In that moment, soaked and terrified and holding a list of impossible debts, she believed every word. She did not know yet that those dark eyes had watched federal investigations collapse like houses made of paper. She did not know that his hands, now pressing against his wound, had never signed anything that could be used as evidence. She did not know that the charcoal coat he wore was worth more than her annual salary had ever been. She knew only that she was no longer alone and that the man beside her had just made a promise to a nobody, a ghost, an invisible woman that the world had already started erasing. And somehow, in the space of that moment, everything began to change. 2 weeks had passed since that rain-soaked drive through the darkness, and Vivien Winters stood on her knees in the kitchen of a $12 million mansion, her fingers raw and bleeding as she scrubbed the baseboards with a brush that cost less than a cup of coffee. The Pacific Heights estate sprawled across an entire city block, all marble and crystal and the kind of silence that only money could purchase. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, walked past without acknowledging her existence, as she did every morning at 6 o'clock. Vivien had become a ghost in this place, just as she had been a ghost everywhere else. The bruises on her throat had faded to yellow-green, like old watercolor bleeding into her skin. She had not seen Alessandro Calabrese since that night on the highway. Sergio had delivered her to this basement room, handed her a uniform, and told her that her salary would be $400 a week, paid directly to whatever account she specified. He had asked nothing. No questions about her past, no requirements beyond the work itself, no explanations. Just a job and a room and the kind of silence that felt like mercy. During her 15-minute break, Vivien pulled the handwritten list from her apron pocket and updated it with a pen she had stolen from the office supply closet. Her handwriting was small and precise, each debt catalogued like a careful accounting of her own destruction. Rent dismissed, living here. Storage paid, AC phone paid, AC doctor bill paid, AC. The letters AC next to each payment represented a man whose first name she did not yet understand she would die for. But new debts kept appearing because Catherine Mercer had found her again, had learned where she worked, and had decided that Vivien's silence was not punishment enough. Her phone buzzed at 7:30 in the morning. Then again. Then 3 more times in rapid succession. Unknown numbers, all of them. Text messages appearing like wounds: thief. Liar. Whore. You don't deserve to live. Douglas wants to find you. I told him you were at Pacific Heights. Her storage company sent an email, additional charges applied due to damages to unit. $1,400. She had not damaged anything. Catherine had damaged it all and arranged for the charges to appear in Vivien's name, and the storage company would never investigate because Catherine's family donated to their corporate foundation. That night, while the mansion slept, Vivien cleaned the third-floor hallway on her hands and knees, pushing the cloth along the baseboards in methodical strokes. The silence was absolute. The grandfather clock downstairs struck 9, and the sound echoed through the empty corridors like a bell tolling away the hours of her life. She did not hear Alessandro approaching from his office. She did not notice him standing in the doorway, watching her move with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being seen meant being threatened. He watched the way she winced when she reached high, favoring her left side where Douglas had cracked her rib 9 months ago. He watched her pull the phone from her pocket, see another message appear, and then carefully place it face down on the floor as if it was a snake that might strike. "Who keeps calling you?" Alessandro's voice carried no emotion. It was simply a question, stated as fact. Vivien's entire body went rigid. She had learned not to be startled by men, because men who startled you were usually the ones who hurt you, but something about Alessandro's presence did not feel like a threat. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing that if you fell, someone would catch you. "Catherine Mercer," Vivien whispered. "My ex-boyfriend's friend." She's been trying to hurt me. She calls from different numbers. She sends messages. She added charges to my storage account. Alessandro had already turned away. Sergio. Franco. My office. Now. The two men appeared at the top of the staircase within 60 seconds. They moved like they had been waiting for this call, positioned and ready. In 15 years of working for Alessandro Calabrese, neither had ever seen him ask about the bruises on a woman's throat. In 15 years, neither had ever seen him hire someone and simply wait. But they had learned not to ask questions. They had learned that Alessandro's silences were often more dangerous than his words, and that when his attention fixed on something, that thing's entire world was about to change. Find out who keeps calling her, Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a temperature that made the air feel thin. Find out who added charges to her storage accounts. Find out every person connected to Catherine Mercer and Douglas Hale. I want a list of names, locations, bank accounts, communications. Everything. Franco's jaw tightened slightly. And Hale himself? Not yet, Alessandro said. When we move against him, he disappears completely. But first I want to know every person who touched her. Every single one. The winter night pressed against the mansion windows, the frost building in delicate patterns that would melt with the morning sun. Vivien had no idea that the most dangerous man in San Francisco was already building a case against everyone who had systematized her ruin. She did not know that Douglas Hale had 3 days left of freedom, or that Catherine Mercer's carefully constructed life was about to collapse like a house built on sand. She knew only that the man in the charcoal coat had heard her name, had said a single sentence, and set forces in motion that would echo through the next month of her life. 1 month later, at exactly 6 in the morning, Vivien was cleaning the 4th floor hallway when she arrived at the sealed door. The brass plaque read closed, but more than that, it seemed to whisper warnings. She had been instructed never to open it, never to ask about it, never even to linger near it. But on this morning, exhausted from another night of Catherine's messages, another false charge added to an account, another threat delivered in the shape of a text, she found herself pausing in front of it. The door seemed to hold something beyond itself, some weight that pressed against the wood from the inside. Come with me. Alessandro's voice made her jump so violently that her cleaning bucket toppled, sending water across the marble floor. He had descended the staircase without a sound. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had not slept, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the kind of exhaustion that came from sitting alone with terrible thoughts. He held a key in his hand. I do not want to, Vivien said, but she was already standing. Come with me anyway. He unlocked the door. The hinges creaked like a sound that had been waiting years to be released. Inside was a nursery frozen in time, pale blue walls that had never been repainted, a white crib with sheets that had never been washed, toys arranged on shelves exactly as they had been left, a mobile of stars hanging motionless in the still air. The dust particles floated through a shaft of window light like tiny prayers. The air smelled of dust and grief and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from closing a door and never opening it again. My son, Alessandro said. His voice broke on the word, actually fractured like something physical had struck him. Micah. He was stillborn 3 years ago. I have never dismantled this room because saying his name out loud still breaks something in my chest. I have paid people to keep it clean. I have paid people to ensure no one ever enters here. I have paid people to make sure that everyone in this house understands that this room does not exist. Vivien stood perfectly still, tears running down her face before she even understood she was crying. She pulled the plastic hospital bracelet from her pocket, the one she carried everywhere, the one that was so worn the ink had nearly faded completely. I had a daughter, she whispered. Lily. She died when she was 2 days old, before I could even bring her home from the hospital. The umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, and by the time they realized it, she had been gone for hours. I never got to hold her. I never got to say goodbye. The hospital bills for trying to save her are part of why I have nothing left. This bracelet, she held it up, the plastic band so small it looked like it had been designed for a doll. This is all I have of her. This is my proof that she existed. They stood together in the nursery, two people who understood that grief was not something you recovered from, it was something you carried for the rest of your life, pressing against your chest like a stone. For the first time in 3 years, Alessandro was not alone in his grief. For the first time in months, Vivien did not feel like she had to apologize for her own. That evening, Alessandro called her to his office. The walls were lined with books she would never have time to read, paintings that cost more than houses, and behind the mahogany desk sat a man who looked suddenly very tired. Sergio and Franco stood by the windows, watching her with something that might have been respect. Alessandro held up the handwritten list, the one that had fallen from her uniform pocket during laundry service. "Tell me about this," he said. "All of it. Every number. Every name." Vivien's face burned with shame, but she began to speak anyway. She told him about Douglas Hale and the night he had beaten her unconscious, about the police officers who had torn up the reports, about Catherine Mercer who had made it her hobby to destroy her reputation at every place of employment. She showed him her phone, 50 blocked numbers, all Catherine's burner phones, all of them calling and calling and calling. "The 65,000, Alessandro said quietly. "Where does it come from?" "Hospital bills from when Douglas put me in the hospital. Rent on the apartment I had to abandon because he knew where I lived. Storage unit fees that Catherine had vandalized and then charged to my name. Legal fees from the restraining order that the police will not enforce because Douglas knows someone in their department." She looked at her hands. 65,000 in 5 days. I make 400 a week. The mathematics do not work, and I have accepted that. I have already accepted it. Alessandro stood and walked to her. He placed a black credit card on the desk between them, and the weight of it seemed to matter more than its actual substance. "The debt is paid," he said. "All of it. Consider it a salary advance for the next 5 years." Vivien backed away. "Why would you help me? I am nobody." "You gave your last dollar to save a stranger bleeding in a diner," Alessandro said. His voice carried something underneath it, something that sounded like recognition. "You are not nobody." 2 days later, at exactly dawn, Vivien was kneeling on the front steps cleaning the marble when a car pulled up with the kind of speed that suggested violence. Douglas Hale stumbled out, his face twisted into something that was no longer entirely human, and his screams shattered the silence of the morning like glass breaking underwater. "You think you can hide behind some rich man's gate," he was shouting, his voice raw and desperate. "You think you're safe now?" He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh the way they always did, dragging her toward his car. She fought and screamed, dropping her cleaning bucket, and the sound of it hitting the marble echoed across the lawn like a bell announcing the end of something. The mansion door exploded open. Sergio and Franco sprinted down the steps, guns drawn, their movements precise and economical like dancers who had practiced this exact choreography 1,000 times. Douglas froze. Alessandro descended the steps slowly, his hands in his pockets, his voice carrying across the frozen grass with the kind of certainty that made the morning itself seem to hold its breath. "Let her go," he said. Douglas laughed, wild and desperate, because he still did not understand that his connections meant nothing. "You don't know who I am. I have cops who'll make you disappear." Douglas Hale, Alessandro said. Age 34. Works at Mercer Logistics as a dispatcher. Arrested twice for assault, September 2022 and March 2023. Charges dropped both times by Officer Ray Martinez, badge number 4478. "You think your connections protect you?" Douglas's face went white. He released Vivien's arm as if she had suddenly turned to fire. "Release her now," Alessandro continued, his voice dropping to something that was barely a whisper, "or I will show you what real connections look like." Douglas ran. He left her standing on the marble steps and ran to his car and drove away at a speed that suggested he finally understood that he had made a mistake that could not be unmade. Vivien collapsed, shaking, and Alessandro kneeled beside her on the cold stone. "He will never touch you again," Alessandro said. "I promise you this." That afternoon, Vivien went to the bank to close her old account and withdraw what remained of her money. In the marble lobby, while customers in expensive suits conducted important transactions, she encountered Catherine Mercer. She stood in the center of the floor like she owned it, tall, elegant, dripping in designer labels, her blonde hair styled with the kind of precision that suggested she spent her mornings being prepared for moments exactly like this. "Well, well," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the lobby like a knife. "Little Vivien, playing dress-up in someone else's house. Do you really think scrubbing toilets makes you worth anything?" Customers turned to stare. Catherine continued, louder, deliberately theatrical in her cruelty. "I have already called your employer," she said. "Told them about your history, the theft, the drugs, the instability. How long do you think you will last this time before he realizes what you actually are?" Vivien's hand shook, but she held Catherine's gaze. "I never stole anything. I never touched drugs. You have been lying about me for months because it entertains you." Catherine leaned close, and her whisper somehow carried farther than her shout. "Douglas was right. You are nothing." What Vivien did not know was that Franco was recording everything from across the street, his phone angled through the bank's front window, capturing every word, every smile, every moment of Catherine's calculated cruelty in perfect digital clarity. Alessandro was already watching the footage, his expression unreadable, his voice quiet and deadly when he spoke to Sergio. "Find everything," he said. "Every account. Every lie. Every person she has called. Every donation she has made to protect her standing. Every business connection. Every piece of her carefully constructed world. I want her life erased the way she tried to erase Vivien's." The engine of his black SUV started in the darkness of the underground garage, and somewhere in the city, the machinery of justice that answered to no law but its own began to turn. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched across the black water like a monument to endings. 2 in the morning. The winter air was so cold it felt like breathing knives, each exhale crystallizing into clouds of frost that hung in front of Vivien Winters' face before dissolving into nothing. Stars overhead burned sharp and merciless, indifferent to the trembling woman whose hands gripped the railing with such force her knuckles had gone white as bone. The water below was infinite and black. She knew how deep it was, deep enough that no one would ever find what sank there. Deep enough to finally be invisible in a way that mattered. Her body ached. Douglas had cornered her in the parking garage of the apartment building where she used to live, where she no longer had any right to be. He had beaten her with the specific violence of a man who believed he owned her, his fists landing on her ribs and her face and her arms as she tried to protect herself. "You'll never be free of me," he had whispered into her ear while his hands left bruises shaped like his rage. "Never." And then this morning, Mrs. Chen had called her into the study. The woman who had employed her for 3 months, the woman who had given her a uniform and a job and a reason to wake up, stood with her arms crossed and her expression locked shut. "I received a phone call from a woman named Catherine Mercer," Mrs. Chen said. "She told me you have a history of theft. That you are unstable. That hiring you was a mistake." Vivien had tried to explain, but Mrs. Chen had already made her decision. "I cannot risk my family's safety. You understand. Please collect your things." The $65,000 debt was paid. Alessandro had cleared it somehow, she did not know how and had learned not to ask. But she had nothing to show for it. No apartment. No job. No future. $200 in her pocket, which was all she had left in the world. The handwritten list of debts that she had carried like a curse now sat abandoned in a trash can somewhere, that burden finally lifted only to be replaced by something heavier, the weight of absolute hopelessness. She thought about that word, invisible. That was what she had always been. A ghost moving through other people's lives, cleaning their messes, serving their meals, solving their problems, and never mattering. Douglas had understood this perfectly. He had known that hurting her was consequence-free because she was nobody. Catherine had weaponized it, turning her invisibility into a systematic destruction that cost her everything. Maybe it would be easier to just let go. Her hands loosened slightly on the railing. The water called with the voice of absolute peace, no more fighting, no more struggling, no more being erased. She leaned forward. Just enough. Just a little more. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She did not want to check it. She wanted to stay in this moment of surrender. But her hand moved on instinct, pulling the phone free. Unknown number. One text message. The nursery is still there. Micah's room. You are not alone in grief. AC? She read it 3 times. 4 times. The words did not make sense, and then slowly, impossibly, they did. She thought of Alessandro standing in that sealed room, his hand trembling on the doorframe, his voice breaking over the name of his son. She thought of how he had turned to her in that darkness and said, "We are the same. We know what it means to be haunted." 1 sentence. But it was enough. Her entire body began to shake, not from the cold, but from something deeper. From the realization that she was not actually invisible to everyone. That one person, the most powerful person in this city, had been watching her. Had been seeing her. Had understood her grief because he carried the same weight. She stepped back from the railing. Her legs nearly buckled. She gripped the metal rail for balance and took one breath, then another, then a third. The stars above were still sharp and cruel, but now they seemed different. Now they seemed like they were waiting for something. She got back in her car. The next night, the machinery of justice that answered to no law but Alessandro's began to move. Douglas Hale left his apartment at exactly 11 o'clock. He was drunk. He was confident. He had texted Vivien, "I'm coming for you tomorrow. No one protects you." He did not see the 3 black SUVs until they boxed him in on a deserted street near the docks, the water visible between the warehouses, the fog rolling thick and suffocating. 12 men in black tactical gear emerged from the vehicles like ghosts materializing from darkness. Sergio led them, his face carved from stone. Franco moved at his side, his eyes cold with purpose. Douglas tried to run. They were faster. "No, no, no, please," his voice cracked as they dragged him toward the waiting van, his feet scraping against the asphalt. "You can't do this. I know people. I have cops." Sergio's voice was ice. "Officer Martinez took early retirement this morning. Some interesting evidence about bribes surfaced. Your cops have been reassigned. You have no one." Alessandro emerged from the lead SUV. He wore a charcoal cashmere coat that cost more than Douglas's monthly salary. His expression was unreadable, but something cold and dangerous burned in his eyes, the look of a man who had decided someone's fate and found it unworthy of mercy. "You put your hands on someone under my protection," Alessandro said. His voice was quiet. Like venom. Like a blade wrapped in ice. "In my world, that is a death sentence. But death is too quick. Too easy. Too merciful." Douglas collapsed to his knees, his entire body shaking. "Please, I'm sorry, I'll disappear, I'll never." The Kozlov family has been looking for new acquisitions, Alessandro continued to Franco, as if Douglas had not spoken. They run the labor camps in the Aleutian Islands. Fishing boats. 16-hour days. No escape. Douglas Hale has just volunteered. "No, no, please," Douglas was sobbing now, his face contorted with terror. But Alessandro had already turned away. He did not watch them throw Douglas into the van. He did not listen to the screams that faded into the fog. By the time the van disappeared into the darkness, Douglas Hale had ceased to exist in any way that mattered. By morning, no one would find him. His apartment would be abandoned. His bank accounts would reveal nothing unusual, no transactions after 11 o'clock at night. It would be as if he had simply evaporated, and no one in San Francisco would ask questions about a man like that. The same night, at 9 o'clock in the evening, Catherine Mercer stood in the center of the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom in a gown that cost $15,000. 200 guests surrounded her, lawyers, businessmen, society wives, all of them drinking champagne and celebrating her latest charitable donation. She was glowing. She was untouchable. She was moments away from complete destruction. When the FBI agents entered, they did so with the precision of people executing a plan they had perfected. Agent Torres moved to the center of the room and tapped the microphone. The music stopped. The room went silent. Catherine Mercer, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and racketeering related to the systematic destruction of 17 women's financial and employment records. Catherine's face went white. This is insane. I am a respected businesswoman. You are also a criminal, Torres said. She held up a folder thick with documents. We have bank transfers showing $340,000 embezzled from Mercer Logistics to fund your personal expenses while you fraudulently claimed financial losses caused by employees you framed. We have recordings. We have witness testimony. We have everything. The ballroom screens flickered to life. Security footage from the bank lobby played, Catherine's voice crystalline and cruel, a homeless nobody with a violent ex. I was just teaching her a lesson. Her laughter filled the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. More footage. Catherine in her living room, on the phone with friends, I ruined that pathetic girl's credit. She'll never work again. It's almost funny how easy it was. Cold amusement in her voice. The casual cruelty of someone who had never imagined consequences. Security took her arms. As they led her away, she screamed, "You don't understand." She was nobody. I was teaching her. The words died as photographers' cameras flashed. By morning, every news outlet in San Francisco had run the story. By the end of the week, it was national. Catherine Mercer, Mercer Logistics CEO, arrested for systematic financial fraud. Mercer Logistics collapsed within 48 hours. Her assets were frozen. Her board resigned. Federal prison, 40 years minimum. Alessandro watched from across the street as the police car drove away, Catherine's face visible in the window, still screaming. He did not smile. He simply nodded once, and Franco nodded back. He texted Vivien, "You are safe now. Both of them are gone." What he did not tell her was that he had been in love with her since the diner, since she had chosen to save him with her last dollar. What he did not tell her was that every moment for the past 3 months had been structured around protecting her, around removing every threat, around building a world where she could finally stop running and finally start living. What he did not know was that she would say yes. 6 months had passed since the night Catherine Mercer's voice filled a ballroom and her world collapsed into federal prison. 6 months since Douglas Hale disappeared into a darkness he created, screaming promises no one would ever keep. 6 months of silence, of safety, of breathing without fear clawing at her throat. Vivien Winters walked through the mansion on Nob Hill carrying fresh linens, but everything about her had changed. The invisible maid was invisible no longer. Her uniform remained black and white, but now it carried a name tag, Head of Household Operations. The salary was $85,000 per year, plus housing in a small cottage on the grounds, plus medical insurance, plus the future. She had enrolled at UCSF in the nursing program. Her tuition, paid in full by an anonymous donor, sat in an account with a handwritten note for the woman who gave her last dollar to a stranger. She did not need to ask who wrote it. The mansion had transformed her the way winter transforms a landscape into something cleaner, sharper, more true. Staff greeted her by name now. Sergio asked her opinion about meal planning. Franco consulted her on the household schedule. She sat at meals instead of serving them. She laughed without apology. But Alessandro had changed too, in ways the world would never see. 3 times in 15 years, his men had witnessed him sit beside someone without distance between them. 3 times in 15 years, they had seen him speak without commanding. That number doubled in 6 months. Marco and Enzo exchanged looks at dinner when Alessandro asked Vivien about her nursing exams, his full attention on her answer like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. One evening, snow began to fall outside the mansion windows. thick, deliberate flakes that covered the city in white. Alessandro found her in the library, grading papers for her organic chemistry class, her legs curled beneath her on a leather chair that cost more than her old rent. "The dining room is ready whenever you are," he said. His voice carried no command, only invitation. She looked up from her textbook. "Ready for what?" "For dinner. Just us. I have been waiting for the right moment." His eyes held something that made her breath catch. "I think tonight is the right moment." Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across the mahogany dining table, the kind of light that made everything it touched look precious. The table was set for two, plates of white porcelain with silver rims, fresh flowers in the center, candles burning down slowly into pools of wax. Vivien wore a simple blue dress, the first dress she had ever chosen for herself without thinking of the cost. Her hair fell down her back for the first time since he met her. Alessandro waited for her at the table's head, but he did not sit there. He sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, something that belonged to him alone. "You have not asked me directly," Vivien said, her hands folded in her lap. "Why you saved me? That night in the diner, you were bleeding, and I gave you everything I had." "That makes no sense." "It makes complete sense," he replied. His hand reached across the table, not touching yet, just present. "You gave me your last dollar when you had every reason to save it for yourself. Every reason to walk past a stranger. Every reason to choose survival over compassion." He paused. The candles flickered. "In 15 years of commanding men through fear, of building an empire that bends because people are afraid of what I can take from them, I had never met anyone who chose kindness when it cost them everything. You bled into that diner booth the same way I did, but you still thought of someone else first." His hand covered hers on the table. She did not pull away. "And when you stood in Micah's nursery and cried with me, I understood something I had not understood in 3 years of grief. That pain does not make you weak. Sharing pain, choosing to feel it with another person, that is the strongest thing any human can do." Vivien's eyes filled with tears. "I am not special, Alessandro. I am just a woman who had nothing and got lucky." "No," he said, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a prayer. "You are a woman who had nothing and still chose to give. That is not luck. That is light. That is what I have been searching for in every shadow for 3 years." The confession hung between them, fragile and true as the candlelight. She did not pull her hand away. They sat in silence while the snow continued to fall outside, covering the city, covering the world, making it new. The next morning, Sergio and Franco watched from the kitchen window as Alessandro walked through the garden with Vivien at his side. His hand rested at the small of her back, a gesture of ownership and tenderness that made no distinction between the two. Her laughter carried on the winter air like bells. Franco leaned against the counter. "In 15 years, I have never seen him smile like that." Sergio nodded, watching them disappear around the hedge maze. "She saved him in that diner. Not from bleeding. From forgetting how to be human. Now he is saving her by showing her she was never nobody. She was just invisible to people who refused to see." 1 year after the diner. 1 year after the night Vivien gave her last dollar to a man with blood on his shirt and destiny in his eyes. The same diner. Same checkered floor in black and white. Same neon sign humming that particular frequency of electricity and exhaustion. But everything else had transformed. Vivien and Alessandro sat in the same booth where she had given him that dollar. She wore her nursing school uniform, the white coat draped over the back of the chair. A silver bracelet caught the light on her wrist, engraved with 2 names, Micah and Lily. He wore his charcoal coat, but his expression was softer now, unguarded in a way his men still did not believe they were seeing. Marge, the night waitress who had served them both for years without knowing they were becoming each other's salvation, approached the booth with a coffee pot and a knowing smile. "Well, look who came back," she said, refilling their cups. "The girl who gave her last dollar and the man who bled all over my booth. You two together now." Vivien reached for Alessandro's hand beneath the table. "We are." Marge smiled, the kind of smile that carries understanding. "Good. The world needs more people who stop to help when it costs them something." Alessandro left a $1,000 bill under the coffee cup. The same booth. The same hour. But everything changed. Outside, frost coated the windows and stars burned overhead like the night they met. The city slept around them, unaware that in this diner, two ghosts had found light in each other. Vivien took his hand as they walked toward his car. Her head rested on his shoulder, natural, like it had always belonged there. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had kept that dollar? If I had walked past you that night?" "Every single day," Alessandro said, stopping at the car door. "And every single day I am grateful you did not. You taught me that power is not fear. It is protection. It is the choice to build a world where someone else can finally stop running and finally start living." He opened the car door for her, and as she stepped into the warmth inside, she understood something that had taken her a year to fully believe: she was no longer invisible. This story teaches us a simple truth that the world tries to convince us is impossible. Vivien Winters gave her last dollar to a dying stranger and discovered he was Alessandro Calabrese, the most feared mafia boss in San Francisco. But what she really discovered was that sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is humble enough to see it. If this story touched your heart, drop a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of kindness can change two lives forever. Comment below and tell us, if you were Vivien in that diner, would you have given your last dollar? Tomorrow we have another story that will break your heart and put it back together. See you then. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears.